Viajeros, muy buenos días, bienvenidos a Mochilazo. Yo soy Luis y estamos en Frankfort, Kentucky. Venimos a la destilería Buffalotrace Distillery, que es el lugar donde hacen el Bourbon Pappy Van Winkle, que es catalogado el mejor whisky del mundo. Vamos a ver si tienen hoy aquí, pero vamos a tomar un tour, el mejor tour que tienen ellos, que también incluye o dejan entrar niños en ese tour. Lo que sí tienen que hacer es agendarlo con 2 meses de anticipación porque esto se llena. Inclusive llegamos una hora antes de la hora de que abren las puertas. Es domingo, lo abren a las 11:30. Llegamos a las 10:30 y ya hay una fila inmensa aquí para poder entrar. Así que tómalo en mente también cuando vengan a visitar, porque los whiskies que hacen ellos, el bourbon whisky que hacen aquí, es verdaderamente muy raro. Es una destilería muy grande, tiene una producción muy grande, están haciendo una expansión de $2 billones, pero se vende como pan caliente, no lo van a poder encontrar y mucha gente lo sabe y viene aquí a la destilería para poder encontrar todos esos bourbon whisky que son los mejores que hay en el mercado, los que hacen Buffalotrace Distillery. Bueno, vamos a empezar, vamos a pasar el check-in. Buffalotrace Distillery es la destilería más premiada del mundo, es la que ha ganado más premios. También Buffalotrace Distillery es la destilería más antigua y más grande que ha estado en funcionamiento continuo desde que abrió. Amigos, los tours en Buffalotrace son gratis. Ellos nos dijeron que hacen mucho dinero con todos los visitantes que tienen al año, entonces no necesitan por qué ponerle precio a sus tickets, a sus tours. Eso es algo que solo esta destilería tiene, y el volumen que tiene más de 1 millón de barricas añejando aquí. Imagínense el volumen de whisky que hacen ellos. Y cada una de sus etiquetas que tienen, Ehtaylor, Blantons, Stagg, son pues personas que han contribuido a la historia y han hecho toda esta destilería durante los años. Son personajes que han marcado la historia de esta destilería.
They finally parted company in the 1880s, and the Stagg Distillery hung on until Prohibition, although this was still called the OFC Distillery. Tiny George Stagg decided he needed an office boy to just help around the office. He hired a kid from across the road over here at age 16, and the kid fell in love with the industry. And he learned every aspect of distilling, from making the whiskey, to bottling the whiskey, to aging the whiskey. He did it all. And he became president of the Stagg Distillery in 1929. And associated with this distillery, ehtaylor, George Stagg, and Albert Blanton. Blanton did the second expansion of this distillery. And one of his expansions, you can just barely see it. There's a tall brick building behind this new metal structure here, the construction, and that was his still house. What was happening in 1929? Prohibition. Albert Blanton had something that few other distilleries had during Prohibition. He had a license to make medicinal whiskey. Now, what did he use medicinal whiskey for? Cough, cold, sore throat, headaches, toothache, sleepiness, sleeplessness, relationships, all kinds of things. And you could get it for your child. It was a medicine to get it for the kids. Lots of moms would get it, put it on the gums of teething babies. Sometimes just to get them to calm down a little bit. I went to the bowels of Warehouse D and learned about aging whiskey. And then if you're nice to your tour guide, we'll come back up here for a tasting. Does that sound like a plan? Yeah. Follow. This afternoon it'll probably be about 135 degrees up there on top. And it'll still be very comfortable in the bottom. In the top floor of the warehouse, whiskey ages in a hurry. Very quickly, 4 years, and you've got good bourbon. sits there in the barrel, soaks into the wood, and it pulls the flavors out. And it can take from 10 to 23 years in the bottom floor of the warehouse to age that whiskey. The middle floor of the warehouse are like Goldilocks and the Three Bears. That usually gets his attention. In the middle floor of the warehouse, it warms up during the day. Notice the windows are open. And the whiskey pushes into the wood of the barrel. Cools off at night, and the whiskey condenses back in the barrel, bringing the flavors with it. And we will age whiskey from roughly 5 to 9 years in the middle floors of the warehouse. And you get these amazingly complex, integrated flavors in the middle floors of the warehouse. And that's where your best bourbon comes from, in my humble opinion. Your oldest whiskeys come from below. Your least expensive whiskeys come from on high. But your classic bourbons come from the middle floors of the warehouse. That warehouse holds 24,000 barrels, by the way. And so you're just seeing a few of them. Anything?
What is what?
I'm sorry?
What is what? The building?
Yeah, does it remind you of anything?
Ehtaylor.
98 Taylor. Doesn't look like any building you've seen before. We don't have enough boomers here. It looks like a train station to me because that's what it was. What's going on?
Amigos, estamos dando tour por la destilería y vean toda la gente que está formada solo para entrar a comprar al gift shop donde venden las botellas. Es toda esta línea. Cuando vengan a visitar Buffalotrace, tengan eso en mente. Vénganse con tiempo, vénganse temprano porque se agota también. Si llegan al gift shop, tal vez si vienen tarde ya no hay.
That you see made of concrete right up here, that is the top of the grain silos. And the train would drop off corn, rye, wheat, and barley there, and then it would continue to the left by the distillery and the furnaces. It would drop off coal for the boilers, and then it would switch around and come back out through here. Before it got back down there, it would drop off barrels. This was the Frankfort and Ohio Railroad, and it ran all the way to Columbus. And Blanton took advantage of the fact that he had this train in here, built this depot, and that was the beginning of bourbon tourism in the 1930s. He'd have parties over there on his grounds. And he loved to have parties. Look at the top windows of the warehouse scene. You will notice that you see more white border than you do as you come down the building. In 2006, that warehouse was hit by a tornado. It completely ripped the roof off of the building. And it sold for 25 bucks a bottle. I went to the liquor store to buy some after I had tasted it. I wasn't working here yet. And the liquor store had raised the price to $50 a bottle, and I wouldn't buy it. There's a bottle event over in Lexington for $4,000 right now. The only warehouse we have that is not made out of brick or does not have the R factor of our brick warehouses. Why do we have a sheet metal warehouse? It was built right after Prohibition, and Albert Blanton needed to get whiskey out to a thirsty population in a hurry. It was hotter.
Oh, hotter. Oh.
And so he could age whiskey faster.
Oh, wow.
And in those early days of after Prohibition, they were selling year-old bourbon, 2-year-old bourbon. When the whiskey in that warehouse started to be 5, 6 years old, something magical happened to it. It became just this really wonderful bourbon that Albert Blanton liked. And when he was having one of his parties over in the garden over here, he tended to get a barrel from that warehouse to serve to his guests. By being Albert Blanton, be able to go into your own warehouse, pull out a barrel, take it over to your guests, tap it, and start serving it. You know, I mean, wow. And now Blanton died in 1959. His master distiller was a guy by the name of Elmer T. Lee, who has a bourbon named after him, as well it should. He created it. But before he created Elmer T. Lee bourbon, he wanted to honor Mr. Blanton with a bourbon under his own name. And of course, he had to get the barrels from that warehouse to make Blanton's single barrel bourbon. And to this day, every bottle of Blanton comes through warehouse C. And so if you have a bottle or you see a bottle, we got some today, you'll see some. It'll have handwritten on there, warehouse C. Is that cool or what?
Very cool.
Got to tell you about the water tower real quick. It was a part of our firefighting operation. That's all it did was to get the water up high so it would give pressure to the fire hydrants for the hoses. The fire station is that little building right over there. It's been converted into a restaurant. Unfortunately, the pandemic closed the restaurant. I'm hoping it'll be open by the end of the year. You know what my favorite bourbon is? Which you asked?
Yeah, what is it?
The one you buy me. Five staves that compose a barrel, and then the top and the bottom called the head, just like the head of a drum. And after they are assembled, we run a gas flame through them, and that chars the barrel to a number 4 char, which is about 60 seconds of a burn. We also call it an alligator char because it looks like alligator hide. The charring does 2 things. Number 1, the charcoal pulls bad flavors out of the whiskey. Number 2, it's drying the wood that much more, and it opens up the fiber so that the whiskey can penetrate into the deep fibers of the barrel. And there are some 70 compounds in a white oak stave that can end up in your whiskey. And what compounds end up there depends on the wood itself, where it is located in the warehouse, and how long. And that's how you get the different flavors in your bourbon from all of those compounds. The whiskey that goes into the barrel is clear as a bell. It looks like moonshine or rubbing alcohol. So it gets all of its color and about 60% of its flavor from the white oak barrel. It is American white oak. Right now, all of our barrels are coming from Kentucky. When we cut a tree, we immediately plant a seedling in its place, so it's very sustainable. We ran into a barrel shortage a few years ago, and it wasn't because we were short on trees, we were short on loggers. On Monday morning, they will start up that conveyor, and they will roll through that green door over there, and they will go immediately from here to be filled. Our Cooperage is in East Bernstadt, Kentucky. You see there's actually a truck full of barrels right over there getting ready to be unloaded. About 250 barrels on that truck. And we fill 1,000 barrels a day. And that means we're dumping 1,000 barrels a day. That'll give you some idea where we are in our production. Bourbon barrel for bourbon. You can only use new white oak, and but that doesn't mean the barrels are wasted. They go to California to age wine. They go to the Caribbean to age rum. They go to Mexico to age tequila. They go to Scotland and Ireland. If anybody has ever compared Scotch next to bourbon, you will know that bourbon is always sweeter. That's because of all the sugar in the white oak. We've pulled that sugar out, and then it's used to make the dry Scotch and Irish whiskeys. Isn't that cool? Some of the barrels even go to Louisiana to age hot sauce, which I think is kind of fun. New stave, and I want to point out that reddish color right there. Can you all see that? That is the depth that the whiskey has penetrated this particular stave. So I want you to understand how much it interacts with the wood. It is what makes bourbon bourbon, is the aging process. All bourbon is whiskey.
Yes.
Not all whiskey is bourbon. To be bourbon whiskey, it has to be made primarily from corn. Corn grows very well in Kentucky. The first whiskeys in this country were made from rye. And even George Washington made rye whiskey. When the pioneers got across the Appalachians, they got into the central United States, they found out rye didn't grow very well. Walk outside and you know why, it's hot and humid. That made the corn grow like crazy. And the pioneers switched to growing corn instead of rye to feed families and livestock and to make whiskey from it. The pioneers were used to the original rye whiskey. They liked the spiciness of rye whiskey, so they would add a little rye to their corn. And today that's the most common recipe for bourbon, some ratio of corn and rye. And the rye amounts are pretty small, 10, 15, 20%. The rest of it being corn. Around the time of the Civil War, a gentleman over there started substituting wheat for the rye because some people like the softer, smoother flavor of a wheated bourbon. And his name was W.L. Weller, William LaRue Weller, and died after the Civil War. The distillery became the Stitzel-Weller Distillery, and they still made wheated bourbons. And one of the owners of the Stitzel-Weller Distillery was a gentleman by the name of Julian Van Winkle, and you now know the rest of that story. If you take your grains, put them into flour, you cook them in a pressure cooker. It only takes an hour. And then we take that cooked mash, which is the cooking breaks down starches in the corn and converts them into simple sugars. And we put that cooked mash cool down in big vats. Ehtaylor's original vats were 15,000 gallons each. Those are the ones that were lined in copper. And he had 10 of them. Still using those, but he needed bigger fermentation vessels, and so he built 12 92,000 gallon tanks. How much is 92,000 gallons? About the volume of this room. And he had 12 of them. After 3 to 5 days, you now have a beer that is about 7% alcohol. We want to extract that beer, extract the alcohol from the beer to make our whiskey. And to do that, we utilize one of the finest precision instruments known to man, a still. And I like that particular still because it's copper, like Taylor would have used, and it belonged to a bootlegger. And it's a real simple procedure. You just put your fermented mash in there, you add heat to it, you get the temperature up to 200 degrees Fahrenheit, And here's where I get to ask the cooks and chemists, what's the boiling point of water? 12, you got it. So we're below the boiling point of water at 200 degrees. But we're above the boiling point of alcohol, which is 178. And so the alcohol comes off as a gas. A little bit of water vapor will come too. And after the first distillation, it'll be about 100 proof, 50% alcohol. We'll run it through the still a second time, and it'll be between 140 and 160 proof. And that's what's eventually going to go into the barrels after we cut it to 125 proof with water. And so we're going to now take that and put it in the barrels. New barrel has about 53 gallons in it, that's 200 liters. After just 4 years in the barrel, you've lost about 25% of the barrel, mostly water. So alcohol has gone up in there. After 9 years in the barrel, that would be buffalotrace, you've lost about 40% of your barrel. And after 18 years, which would be our antique collection, we've only got about a third of a barrel left. If you want some 23-year-old Pappy Van Winkle, at the end of 23 years, there's only 5 to 7 gallons left in a 53-gallon barrel. Now add to that the fact that the Commonwealth of Kentucky and the federal government are taxing these barrels each year they are in the warehouse, and you start to appreciate the economics of old whiskey. The longer you have it, the less whiskey is in the barrel, and the more taxes you have paid on that product. Some of us will stay 17 years, and if you're really lucky, it'll stay here 20 years and we're double even. Mark W.L. Weller, and that is the weeded recipe. That's the one weeded recipe we have. W.L. Weller is normally aged in the middle floors for 7 years to be Weller Reserve or Weller Antique, and down here it's aged 12 years to be Weller 12-year-old. If you look at those barrels, they've been put in here in 2007. Do the math.
Oh, yeah.
How long have they been here? 14 years. Mm-hmm. So they are probably going to be one of the Van Winkle bourbons. Mm-hmm. The only difference between Weller and Van Winkle are age. Mm-hmm. You see the barrels leak, and I don't recommend tasting them. It doesn't taste like much. You can see all the floors above us. And we have the space between the floorboards so the air circulates. And this time of year, we'll just keep the windows open all the time to move the air in and out. Yes, sir.
I have a quick question. So it's true when people say that Weller is the Pappy Van Winkle for poor people?
Say it again.
Like people say, like Weller bourbon is the Pappy Van Winkle for poor people.
Well, not necessarily. I think I like to think more that W. Weller is for smart people.
Smart people, I like that.
Yeah.
Son Weller y el Weller es de 12 años y lo dejaron. Este va a ser Pappy Van Winkle.
Y ahora estamos en el warehouse donde está eaglerare. Todo lo que va a salir de eaglerare está aquí. Eaglerare 10 años, eaglerare 20 años y luego Weller. Descubrimos que el Weller es el Pappy Van Winkle, solo un añejamiento pues más largo, por más años de lo que es. Aquí tenemos una barrica de Weller que se hizo en el 2017, tiene ahorita 14 años. Entonces este Weller ya pasó el tiempo de Weller y se va a hacer Pappy Van Winkle. Amigos, y pues también esto es un almacén secreto, bueno, donde lo están almacenando. Si vieron, entramos por un librero. Eso es muy cool porque es parte de la prohibición que lo escondían para añejarlo. Y nunca habíamos hecho unos tours antes en Buffalotrace con Freddy, nos tocó una vez con Freddy, el famoso Freddy, pero nunca habíamos entrado a esto que tiene aquí Buffalotrace. Y qué chido porque a lo mejor no están en Kentucky envueltos tanto en el bourbon, pero lo que es Rare, Weller y Pappy Van Winkle es la mata de la mata, el mejor whisky del mundo. Y ahí está, añejado o descansando en esos warehouse que tienen ahí oculto. De ahí es donde va a salir todo.
this is Eugene. He is another tour guide. He is going to scan your wristband. He will not steal your data while he's doing it.
Maybe DNA. Good job, man. Give me 5.
He's learning early.
All right.
Then we have our Bourbon Cream, we have our Blantons, we have eaglerare, buffalotrace, and we're going to start with the weekly vodka. I'm going to give you all some instructions right here. When we drink the bourbons, save a little bit of one of your bourbons during the tasting. We'll use that for an experiment at the end. In the same way, when you drink the Bourbon Cream, save a little bit of the Bourbon Cream for a further experiment. We're going to start with the weekly vodka. Why does the Bourbon Distillery make vodka? Because we can. It pays the bills. I can make this today and sell it to you tomorrow. I don't have to age it. This is a pretty remarkable bourbon. We call it a craft bourbon. You may too after I tell you how it's made. Harlan Wheatley, our master distiller, who it's named for, I just realized I left my cup over at the warehouse meeting. I make martinis out of it by simply pouring that into the martini glass and looking at a bottle of vermouth. It does not need any vermouth to smooth it out. They use the same mash bill number 1. The real difference between these two bourbons is where they're aged and a little bit about how long. Buffalotrace is aged in the middle floor of the warehouse. It will be 8 or 9 years of age. In that middle floor, remember the whiskey is pushing into the wood when it's warm, cooling, comes back into the barrel, and it's doing that for 365 days a year for 8 or 9 years. Gives it a very big flavor. It is a very smooth bourbon. When you get into the 8, 9-year-old bourbons, you're getting into smooth bourbons. And it makes a great cocktail. And it's also great just to drink neat or on the rocks. So again, try a little of the bourbon, try a little bit of the buffalotrace. I like to nose it first, swirl it around, and we'll open it up. And actually change the flavor a bit when you swirl it. 10 years old, from the lower floor of the warehouse, again, give it a nose and then a swirl. Okay, of those two bourbons, does everybody try both bourbons? Who likes buffalotrace the best? That's mine. Who likes eaglerare the best? About right. Eaglerare is my sipping bourbon. I like it. These are on the rocks. Different product, and that is Blanton. Blanton comes from that one metal warehouse. It is mash bill number 2. It is a little bit higher in rye. And do the same thing. Nose it, swirl it, and take a sip of it. Does anybody prefer the Blanton to the other bourbon? You do.
I changed my mind, eaglerare.
Okay, now we're going to be sure to say one bourbon. We're now going to go to the Bourbon Cream. For you guys that did not like the bourbon, you'll like the Bourbon Cream. Remember to save a little bit of the Bourbon Cream. As soon as you taste it, you will know, man, I would like to have that in my morning coffee. And it's poured over brownies. We put it in waffle mix and pancake batter.
In the cereal?
Put some of the Freddy's root beer in your Bourbon Cream, about 1 to 1. And you just created an adult root beer float. Wow. That is also good with ice cream. Yes, and you can do the same thing with...
So good.
The last thing you have there is a bourbon ball wrapped in foil. And that has a pecan on there. And I want you to take a bite of your bourbon ball Those are made by Rebecca Root Candy right here in Frankfort that you make since 1917. Take a bite of the bourbon while you still have some candy in your mouth. Take a sip of one of your bourbons. And you can see what a great pairing chocolate is with bourbon. Isn't that fun? And that is all the damage I can do to you guys today.
Viajeros, hemos terminado el tour, estamos en el gift shop. Aquí ven, la fila está enorme y se han acabado las botellas de Blantons. Fue lo que les dije desde el inicio, tienen que hacer mucha fila aquí desde temprano porque vuelan. Apenas el tour duró 75 minutos, 1:15 y se acabaron las botellas que tenían en el gift shop. Así que ténganlo en cuenta cuando vengan a comprar. Si quieren algo especial, tienen que venir temprano. Si pueden, vengan entre semana. Si es el fin de semana, antes de que abran ya tienen que estar formados para que las compren. La tapa de la botella de Blantons tiene los caballitos que emulan cómo corre un caballo y los pueden comprar. Si uno tiene la colección, aquí la pueden encontrar si es que existe. Bueno, si hay la que están buscando, la que les falta. Por cierto, solo pueden comprar una de estas cada 3 meses. Aquí guardan su identificación, su ID en las computadoras y solo pueden comprar una cada 3 meses. Viajeros, esto fue el tour en Buffalotrace, la destilería, una de las destilerías icónicas de Kentucky, que es el mejor whisky del mundo aquí, el Pappy Van Winkle.
Es muy popular, les recomendamos que agenden su visita con un mínimo un mes de anticipación si quieren hacer un tour o si quieren hacer pruebas. Lleguen temprano porque las colas para el gift shop son demasiado largas.
Visiten su página de internet, es la forma en que pueden reservar todos los tours.
Mientras estén aquí, tómense un tiempo para recorrer los jardines que tienen están muy padres. Si traen niños, tienen un parquecito donde pueden jugar y está muy padre aquí las instalaciones.
Disfruten al máximo. Esto fue todo. Esto es Mochilazo, yo soy Luis.
Y yo soy Gaby.
Si les ha gustado, denos un like y recomiéndenos con un amigo para poder seguir creciendo y llegar a más gente y llevarles todo esto que hacemos nosotros.
Bye.
Sigan las demás destilerías de Kentucky porque esta es la primera que vamos a hacer. Viajeros, como siempre, muchas gracias por ver este video. Si no se han suscrito, suscríbanse al canal, den un like si les ha gustado y compartan con los viajeros a quienes pueda servir esta información.